All right, so welcome to our January 2023 New Year, third Thursday training. Tonight we are looking at the overtures from the 225th General Assembly, specifically focused on the proposed amendments to the rules of discipline. The
Mm.
proposed amendments to the rules of discipline. So before we do that, let's open in prayer. Let's pray. Oh, gracious and loving God, you call us to lives that show love for you, love for neighbor, love for self, and you extend forgiveness and grace because
Mm.
we stumble, we fall, we go our own ways all the time. And in the church, we know that that's part of who we know ourselves to be. It's why in worship we pray a prayer of confession, we seek an assurance of pardon, and it's why we have rules of discipline. It's why we have processes in order for the healing of your body.
Mm.
So be with us tonight as we look at these proposed changes to how we, as the Presbyterian Church, seek to hold one another accountable in ways that are just, in ways that protect those who are vulnerable and those who have been harmed, in ways that seek repair, seek reconciliation, seek the health of the body. So be with us and guide us in this time. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
And
Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah. All right. So, a little bit of framing for you. You may remember, those of you who have been on before, I'm going to share this, that we've been working our way through these proposed amendments. We spent one Thursday evening looking at the amendments to the foundations of Presbyterian policy. That's actually Presbyterian polity. There's a corrected pamphlet that I clearly need to download, and the directory for worship. In December, we looked at the proposed amendments to the form of government. So you see how many, all these amendments. Tonight, we are looking at the rules of discipline, which look shorter. So we have these four proposed amendments, but then this fifth one is where we're going to spend most of our time. This fifth one is a proposed complete replacement. So the proposed amendment is to replace what is now the Rules of Discipline section with a new section entitled Church Discipline that organizes differently and has changes in language. So what does that mean? That means these four that precede 22GG, these are all amendments for the current rules of discipline, what is already in our Book of Order. We are going to vote on those in the event that the proposed replacement, the 22GG new church discipline section, if that fails, if a majority of presbyteries vote no on adopting this new section, then these other four amendments will be incorporated into the current rules of discipline. On the other hand, if the new church discipline section is approved, if a majority of presbyteries vote yes, then the action that is taken on these other four amendments is moot because they're amending something that will no longer be in our Book of Order. Does that make sense? Clear as mud? So we have to take action on all of them because whatever happens with that very last amendment, the new church discipline section, will determine the fate of the previous four. So we're not going to not vote and just hope that the Church of Discipline section is replaced, or vice versa. Only vote on what is for the current Book of Order and hope that it is, voted down. We're going to vote on all of them. But one way or the other, only one piece is going to move forward. Okay? Clear as mud. So tonight we're going to focus most of our time on the new church discipline section. So this is in the pamphlet, but I'm actually going to, before we dive into those words, I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint that was prepared for the committee that met at General Assembly that worked on the proposed complete revision. So you've got a little bit more of the background, like, what do you mean they're going to replace an entire section of the Book of Order? How does that happen? Well, let's take a look at how that happens. Does everyone see that beautiful PowerPoint slide? Yes. So it happens as all overtures to all amendments to the Book of Order happen. It begins with an overture. So the Presbytery of Chicago overtured the General Assembly a while ago now. I think that was the 222nd General Assembly. And they asked that a revision of the rules of discipline be undertaken. This follows the revision of the previous section. So when our current form of government, which for a long time has been known as the new form of government, when it was adopted, what was that, 2010, 2012? That came with it a revised form of government, and it added the foundations of Presbyterian polity. So those revisions were part of the quote unquote new form of government. And then in 2016, I think it was 2016, yes. A group that had been working on the Directory for Worship brought a revision. And so the Directory for Worship revision was adopted at a previous General Assembly just a few years ago. So now it's time for the last section. We are at the church reform and always being reformed. So Chicago Presbytery overtured the General Assembly asking for a revision to the rules of discipline. And these were the specific things they cited. They wanted to make these rules more accessible. If you have had occasion to read through or try to use our current rules of discipline, it's challenging. It's challenging. Like you have to spend some time sorting and going back and forth between sections. It's not laid out in a particularly user-friendly way. We have amazing constitutional interpreters in the Office of the General Assembly who help at the drop of a hat, but the current rules of discipline are hard. They're hard to use. The overture asked that accountability be preserved, that in a revision of the rules of discipline, we don't lose the reason we have them in the first place. But also to expand the ability and the availability to use things like mediation and alternate dispute resolution. The current rules of discipline allow for an alternate form of resolution. Again, it's a difficult process that isn't clearly spelled out, doesn't talk a lot about mediation. So once you've started in the timeline, your ability to use other paths paths other than going to the Permanent Judicial Commission, having a trial, those opportunities are narrow. So part of the overture was saying we need to expand our ability to seek to hold one another accountable without having to go through a trial to get there. And then to provide some flexibility. We're trying to be a church that doesn't have a one size fits all, because our contexts are so different across the PCUSA. So the request was for a church discipline that had some breathing room, that there was a little more ability to be creative. Kind of the punishment fitting the crime, but within the realm of the church. So those were the things that were lifted up by the initial overture. That General Assembly did pass that, adopt that overture, and voted to establish a task force, which was appointed in 2017, which is why I know it was the General Assembly in 2016 that established this task force. And these were the members.
Whoa.
A lot of stated clerks. And stated clerks are the ones at the Presbyterian synod levels who use the rules of discipline the most. We're the ones who all the process starts with a formal complaint, with somebody reaching out and saying, I think something wrong has happened. What do I do about it? We pull out the rules of discipline and we say, here are the avenues you can use. So here are the folks who formed this task force. These names mean a lot to me personally, and these are colleagues that I would trust to take on this really important work. So they started meeting in 2017. They actually brought the initial revision to the General Assembly that met in 2020. So we were ready to move forward with considering a revision in 2020. And we all know what happened in March of 2020. And that the pandemic meant that the Presbyterian Church could not gather physically for an assembly, and our rules didn't allow us to gather electronically. So we could not take action like this. We couldn't vote to change part of our book of order when technically by our rules, we weren't allowed to take any votes at all. That's a whole nother story. Anyway, so 2022, the Assembly finally considered the revision. This lays out the process. The process included an opportunity for draft remarks for other stated clerks and other people who have served on our permanent judicial commissions to weigh in, to read through and say, whoa, wait, I don't understand what this means, or what happened to this piece of the process. So it went through that comment period that we would want such a major revision to go through. Here's all the other pieces that happened. And then in 2022, it came to the 225th General Assembly. So here are the major changes that are being proposed. First of all is a name change. Currently, it's rules of discipline. And so part of this particular overture would create a church discipline section. Maybe a minor change, but it seeks to set the tone for what this is. So rules of discipline. This is how we hold one another accountable in the church. This is church discipline. It really seeks to simplify the wording. It really tries to, as much as possible, make a difficult process accessible so that it's not as hard to present to somebody, this is the process, or to guide a PJC, Permanent Judicial Commission, through a process. And it also reorganizes. So it looks significantly different from the current rules of discipline because it's organized in a way that's meant to be a more natural flow. So instead of having to flip between, the third chapter to the 12th chapter to the 5th chapter to track the process, it's meant to follow. But that means it looks really different. The other huge piece that will look different on the surface, but is not different under the surface, is the incorporation of authoritative interpretations. So what happens with the Presbyterian Church, say we have a case here at the presbytery level, and it gets appealed to the synod. And from the synod, it gets appealed to the Permanent Judicial Commission of the General Assembly. Each level of our church has an ability for discipline to be judged, and we call that a Permanent Judicial Commission. At the church level, the session acts as the PJC. So something gets appealed to the General Assembly Permanent Judicial Commission, and at that point, it's usually a matter of how is something in the Book of Order interpreted. Once it gets to the General Assembly level, it's not, is so-and-so guilty? It's more, how do we understand this language? And how are we applying this language to this particular case? And those cases result in authoritative interpretations. It's similar to a Supreme Court ruling, and we've been seeing a lot of that. The Supreme Court says, this is how we interpret this law, and that becomes an authoritative interpretation, which then guides how that law is applied in the future. That's what we do in the church, in the Presbyterian Church as well. So what has happened is over decades, we've built up all these authoritative interpretations, which are available through an online annotated Book of Order, which is really, well, you have to remember that, I have to go check and see, is there an authoritative interpretation on this? I mean, it's this outside step that most of us don't ever think about. And so this task force that was revising the church discipline section said the major authoritative interpretations that actually shift how we understand the application of our Constitution need to be included in this proposed church discipline section. They need to be visible to everybody and not only visible to those who have access to some of the behind the scenes stuff. So that will look different to most of us, but they are things that are already meant to be part of our practice. Does that make sense so far? If it doesn't make sense, if you have a question, jump in. So all of these pieces build into what is being proposed and why it will look different, in some cases sound different, and in some cases be different because it's pulling in things that have been decided elsewhere. Okay. Some of the other changes. And these are changes that are kind of driven by a need for that flexibility. Former members of a permanent judicial commission can now be included in the process of appointing for review and administrative leave evaluations. What that means is if that process is necessary, there's a greater pool of people to pull from to make a decision. That's really helpful, especially in close-knit presbyteries where everybody knows everybody and those, 3 degrees of separation. Having a larger pool of people that you can bring into some of the decision making can be really important. Now, for a permanent judicial commission, a quorum of 5 can render a decision. Also really important for some other intricate rules that have been in play previously. And so now, previously, people were always elected only to a 7-year term. Permanent judicial commission term is 7 years. And so you could end up with a whole group of people finishing at one time and have empty classes. So, it's a minor change, but that technical change allows for greater flexibility. And that eligibility for reelection, as you can see, reduced from 4 years to 2 years. Serving on the PJC is, it takes a specific set of spiritual gifts. And so when you've got people who feel called to this work, being able to invite them back into it after a 2-year Sabbath is helpful. It's helpful. And then the membership is to reflect the membership of the council, and that's language intended to point to issues of representation. Does the Permanent Judicial Commission reflect the ethnicity, the racial makeup, the gender makeup, the orientation and identity makeup of the presbytery of the synod? So those are tweaks that that can make some technical differences that can help in the future. Okay, so some general process changes. So these are just overviews, and then if we want, we can dive into the actual language. Now, in the revised church discipline section, there will be language about electronic meetings and testimony notices and how we can carry out this work electronically and not just, I think it still has language of like certified mail. In fact, I know it does. It still has language about certified mail. Yeah, so the proposed revision broadens that. Also allows for witnesses to appear electronically. Again, learning from our experience the last few years, sometimes we need the ability to gather electronically. Some pieces around expert witnesses and witnesses of fact and how they are treated. For most of us, that's not a material change, but if a complaint goes to trial, that becomes important. The requirement of a second citation to witnesses has been removed. So only one citation to witnesses will be necessary in the new church discipline section. Taking into account the endless process of appeals and changing the language around how an appeal can be filed and what can be appealed, as well as how a request to withdraw an appeal may be handled. So just some process changes there. Changes to the remedial process. So we in the Presbyterian Church, we've essentially divided our disciplinary process into two kinds. Remedial process is a complaint against a body. Like someone could file a remedial complaint against the presbytery and say, this particular vote at the presbytery meeting was not handled correctly according to the standing rules of the presbytery and Robert's Rules of Order. That's a remedial complaint. The other complaint is a disciplinary complaint. So a few changes to that remedial process. So the preliminary question part, one of the important pieces for remedial complaint is the question, can relief be granted? If you file a complaint that a vote was taken wrong, but there's no way to provide relief, like there isn't a way to take back the vote or redo the vote, then relief can't be granted and your complaint has no standing. Count yourselves blessed if you never have to go deeper in this language. And so these changes to remedial process are meant to clarify where there have been questions and bring in some of those previous authoritative interpretations that have settled some of those questions, but have not been included in the text of the discipline section. All right, and no more hearsay evidence. So that's the remedial process, and you see the proposed changes there. The disciplinary process is the harder process because that's where the complaint comes around harassment or inappropriate treatment, financial impropriety. That's when there's somebody who is accused of having harmed another person or persons. And rightfully so, there are many more details that surround a disciplinary process. Yeah. And so in disciplinary cases, hearsay evidence would still be allowed. So that's one of the changes between those two processes. This is one of the places where the ability to seek other forms of closure are expanded, and you see that language of restorative justice. So that would be an addition newly introduced as part of the alternative resolution process. And so expanding how we respond when allegations of harm have been substantiated. And even if allegations of harm have not been substantiated, simply in the making of an allegation of harm, there's harm. So how do we bring healing and restoration to the body of Christ? Each charge now, this is one of those places that was kind of a gray area, like how are the charges supposed to be worded? It wasn't entirely clear. And so one of the proposed changes is stating very clearly, where was scripture violated? Where was the Constitution of the PCUSA violated? So clearly saying you have to spell that out. In the civil court, innocent before proven guilty, which we also hold, but then there's that language of beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, we're the church. We are not a civil court. We are not a Supreme Court. We do have a different standard of proof in the church. And so part of this revision is helping us in the church understand that difference, that beyond a reasonable doubt means something a little different in a church process than in a criminal trial where there's forensic evidence. If you're at a point where you need forensic evidence, then it needs to be a civil case. We're dealing with church and harm in church. And so that language has been clarified and added. Whew. And then the statute of limitations being removed. And And that was one of the places that was confusing because there were different statutes of limitations for different alleged complaints. So you had to figure out, well, your complaint isn't sexual misconduct, it's harassment. And so it doesn't fall under this guidance. It was confusing. So that has been in this revision completely removed. There is no statute of limitations. There are reasons to argue for and against that, but in this particular document, that's how it's being presented without a statute of limitations. This is a good time to remind us all that as we vote on amendments to our Constitution, we are voting these yes or no. We are not amending them. These came from the General Assembly, so we can't amend them and send them back. We can create an overture and send an overture to the next General Assembly saying, no, we want the statute of limitations. We can do that. But in the process of voting on this, we can't amend what we're voting on. And that will be explained during the Presbytery meeting when we take these up. Whew. Any questions so far? This is a lot that I'm throwing at you. All right. So in disciplinary cases, there has been I think it was 4, but a small number of ways to move forward if a complaint is substantiated, if somebody is found guilty of inappropriate behavior. And that's another place where things have been a little like, but what happens if, and what happens when? And so this piece, temporary exclusion, which is our way of saying defrocked. I mean, we don't frock people in the Presbyterian Church, we ordain them. Temporary exclusion is saying for this period of time, you may not engage in ordained ministry or ministry within the church. And that's usually paired with some kind of restorative action. While you're excluded, you will engage in counseling with a licensed psychotherapist, and proof of those counseling sessions must be submitted to the Commission on Ministers and Congregations, something like that. At the end of a period of so many years, you may apply for reinstatement. That's usually how a temporary exclusion works. But what happens if somebody is temporarily excluded with a list of requirements and a timeline, and they don't do anything? Well, if that judgment didn't include language like, if these requirements are not met by such and such a date, exclusion will become permanent, then it's just in limbo. It's just hanging out there unless another PJC picks that up and makes a new ruling. So the revision allows for temporary exclusion to become permanent. Not automatically, but it allows for that process to be closed without having to go through another complaint and trial period. Again, we really try hard to stress that the purpose of church discipline is not to beat somebody up. The purpose of church discipline is not to tear somebody down. It is for the purpose of justice and restoration. God desires us to live in a world where all people are made whole. We're really far from that. But in the meantime, we're called to try. And so part of the revision includes adding this statement to every censure. The censure is not given with malice, is given not with malice or vindictiveness, but in Christian love, to offer you correction in error and the possibility of full community restoration. Or if somebody is being removed from ministry or membership, to restore the unity of the church by removing from it the discord and division the offenses have caused. So even in establishing a censure or removal from ministry, trying to say this is why we're doing this. It's not about punishment, it is about justice. That may feel like a fine line, but it's one we try really hard to hold on to. So, these are recommendations that came from the task force that we don't need to look at, and that's the end of that PowerPoint. Woohoo! So that's the overview of what this new church discipline section is trying to be and do, and the driving force that was behind it. Any questions? So I'm going to pull up that proposed section real fast, and then we will, let's see, and I'm going to make this a little bigger for everybody, and then we'll take a quick look at the ones that are related to the current rules of discipline. So this is one of the things that we're going to be voting on Tuesday, February 7th. Shall the current rules of discipline be replaced with church discipline as follows? Hello. And let's see, I'm going to, there we go. Yes, one of the things I will point out is the current rules of discipline is 14 chapters, and we will see that this is shorter. So a preamble talking again about why are we doing this? It's for the sake of Jesus. What is church discipline? It's to guide, control, and nurture for correction and restraint. And lifting up and reminding us that it's not a substitute for the civil, secular judicial system. And there are times when both processes are happening. They can't really happen in tandem because of the way laws work. But something that starts in the church discipline might pause because it has moved to a civil matter. Or something that is finished in church discipline may then move to a civil matter. For instance, and this happens, well, it happens in a lot of cases, but in particular, a case I'm aware of that was embezzlement. So a pastor and one or two church members embezzled money, not in this presbytery. Not that, anyway. The case I'm talking about happened in another presbytery. So there was a case in the presbytery that removed the pastor from ministry, that stripped his ordination and removed the elders from membership because of the severity of the embezzlement. So that was the church process. And then there was a criminal process where the presbytery did go to court to seek a restoration of funds. So both of those things happened. The church didn't have the right, the presbytery didn't have the right to say, and now you're going to pay us back. That's a civil process piece, okay? And same thing with misconduct or harm or abuse. Church process has to do with church membership, exercise of ministry within the church, status within the church. Civil process has to do with jail, fines, repayment, those kinds of things. We cannot send somebody to jail. No. So lifting that up, making that clear to people that there are two different processes that may have to both be pursued. And so church discipline alone is not adequate. Lots of other things going on. So this preamble is really trying to set the tone of what this is, what it is not, what it can do, what it can't do. Purpose of church discipline. First and foremost, to honor God. That's the first purpose. Preserve the purity of the church. Pursue revealed truth. Achieve justice and compassion for everybody. For everybody. The alleged offender, the one who is making the allegation, everybody. Correct, restrain wrongdoing, repentance, restoration. These are our words. Uphold dignity, restore unity, and yes, the right to a speedy trial. Yeah. And due process. We have our own principles of due process. The ability to mediate. And again, that's one of those pieces that is missing in the current rules of discipline that now is in this very first chapter, that conciliation and mediation can be part of the church discipline process. Chapter 2 defines it. What is it? Accountability, what the counsels are, what does that mean? What's the remedial process? What's the disciplinary process? So those pieces that we touched on a little bit earlier. What is an offense? What is the standards? This is so much shorter than the comparable stuff in the current rules of discipline. I cannot tell you how to vote. I'm excited about this revision. But the Spirit moves us each to vote according to our conscience. That is part of our polity. Chapter 3 lays out what a permanent judicial commission is, what the composition is, how it operates at the different levels. For a presbytery, no fewer than 7, giving us that guidance. Remember the stuff about quorum and review? That's this next paragraph. So that's addition, expanded language. Classes and terms, vacancies. So all of this has to do with the Permanent Judicial Commission. What is eligibility? How are commission expenses handled? That can be important because sometimes commissions have to seek legal advice because of a complexity of an allegation. Sometimes they have to bring in experts or fly people in for depositions. That is actually a part of our process, doing depositions. So how are those expenses handled? Who are the officers? What powers do they have? How can they meet? All of those important questions that are not as clearly answered or as succinctly answered in the current rules of discipline. What's a quorum? Who shall not participate? Really helpful to know. That roster of former members, that's in the current rules of discipline. What is a quorum? All of these pieces, again, just trying to be very clear. This is how this works. These are the processes. So the 4th chapter is on remediation. Again, what is that remedial process? What's it for? What are the limitations? There are deadlines for a remedial process. What are those deadlines? How do you file a complaint? Hey, look right there. Filing a complaint. It's laid out. It's fantastic. Who is involved? Who are the parties of a remedial complaint? What is a committee of counsel? That was a new one for me. Another presbytery I was connected to, there was a remedial complaint against the council of the presbytery. And so a committee of counsel it was really interesting. I was like, I had no idea about this part. So what is that? Well, these revised church discipline section has that information. Time limits for remedial cases, standing and jurisdiction, who can file, who has the right to file, very clearly laid out. What is the effect of jurisdiction? You know, who has to enforce the decision? That's what part of this is. What needs to be included in the complaint? This is one of the pieces that was in an appendix of the rules of discipline in the Book of Order. So here it's pulling in this information directly into the discipline section. What do you need in order to file a formal complaint? How do you file a formal complaint? Here we go. Certified mail, return receipt, commercial courier, or personal delivery in accordance with D40103B. So more than one way. It's not just certified mail. The ability to request a stay of enforcement. That's not new. That's continuing, but more precisely defined. Piece about preliminary rulings. So all of this has to do, this section, the 4th chapter of the proposed church discipline section, is all about the remedial complaint. So again, instead of having to shift back and forth, what do you need to file a remedial complaint? Who can file a remedial complaint? How is it dealt with? It's all consolidated in chapter 4, which makes for a long chapter, as you can see. Lots of moving pieces. Again, I hope none of us ever have to apply these things. And then what is the trial? So chapter 4 is, you know, how do you file? Who can file? What are you looking for? All the pieces that are necessary to move through that filing, responding process. What happens if it goes to trial? Chapter 5 is your guidance in the proposed revision. So again, just what does it mean to bring in witnesses? What is a service of citation? Can you receive electronic testimony? So all of these questions, trying to answer them up front and clearly. Yeah, controlling the conduct of trial. This is not Judge Judy trial. This is not shouting across a courtroom. This is, again, the church and seeking to do things in a way that honor God. Oh, all these pieces. And what happens? Announcement of the moderator, objections, preliminary determinations, amendment of complaint. Again, trying to bring in the pieces that have been addressed in authoritative interpretations, places where presbyteries have come and said, this didn't work. We got to this point in the process, and then it wasn't clear what was supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen now? This is seeking to close those gaps. And as you can see, the process about a trial is also long. This is in that amendment pamphlet. If you want to read the whole thing, I encourage you to, but we're not gonna, that would take us a lot longer than 90 minutes tonight. Okay, that was chapter 5. This is chapter 6 about appeals. We have to allow for an appeal process. So chapter 4 was, what is a remedial complaint? How do you file it? How is it handled? Chapter 5, the trial for a remedial complaint. Chapter 6, remedial appeals. So again, instead of having to go, there's one chapter on appeals that then has, if it's remedial, if it's disciplinary. One chapter on trial, if it's remedial, if it's disciplinary. Bringing it all together. So this is the appeal process. Chapter 6. Woo, woo, woo. Yep, just pushing right through. And then chapter 7 shifts us to our second process, which is that disciplinary process. And now this will follow the same outline as chapters 4, 5, and 6. So chapters 7, 8, and 9, I think one after the other as well, will be, what is it? What is the disciplinary process? What is a disciplinary a charge of disciplinary offense? How is it received? What needs to be in it? How do you respond to it? What are the steps? That would be chapter 7. Yep, How members receiving allegations from any source, what happens? Self-accusation, what happens? I've seen that, a pastor self-accusing. A request for vindication, if somebody is alleged to do harm and it becomes clear that the allegation is false, there's a process for requesting vindication, part of healing the harm. What is the jurisdiction? All of this has to do with the process. What is a disciplinary complaint? How does it work? What is necessary? And again, it's long because there are a lot of moving pieces to cover in order to outline the process in a way that, as much as possible, makes it easy to follow. Okay, so I was wrong. The process for disciplinary complaint, no, that's right. It's the same. Trial is next. Whoa. So chapter 8, trial and a disciplinary complaint. So again, I was right. It's mirroring the remedial process. It's just water. So again, all the pieces related to a trial, pre-trial conference. That's confusing stuff. Let me tell you. Conduct of the trial, citations and testimony, who may be cited, there's a lot. Again, these are things we never want to have to use, but when there is harm, it is a gift to the church that we have a section in our Constitution that shows us the path in how to respond and how to move forward. So, following for the disciplinary, instead of moving straight into appeals, it moves into censure and restoration. So, if an allegation of harm is upheld, what then? And so chapter 9 looks at those things, the degrees of censure. Rebuke with supervised rehabilitation. What does that mean? How do you do it? A censure pronouncement. What is temporary exclusion? What is it for? And so these things are new. So, we see D 90105 temporary exclusion, what it is, but these pieces, the process of communicating goals, supervised rehabilitation, voluntary acts of repentance, and the effects of temporary exclusion from the exercise of ordered ministry, those are new sections that clearly lay out this is what is possible as part of a temporary exclusion. Super helpful. The possibility of early restoration, that is not currently part of our process. What happens if we remove? Because sometimes we do. Sometimes the harm is such that removing somebody is the appropriate action. What about restoration? What does that look like? So there's a section about restoration to membership, restoration to ordered ministry, and then the appeals section in chapter 10 and how that works. Appeal. Okay, so that is it. We go from 14 chapters in the current rules of discipline to 10 chapters in the proposed church discipline. And at the bottom, all of that is the motion. We're not going to read that whole motion, of course, during the presbytery meeting. But all of that is the motion to replace the current rules of discipline with this document called church discipline. And then it gives us the rationale, some of which we already looked at in that PowerPoint. Ooh, that's the big piece. That's the big piece that came. Important work came out of this General Assembly, but in terms of the Book of Order, a complete replacement of the rules of discipline is the big piece. questions, comments, wonderings? I heard that. And so let me tell you, when I was a newly ordained pastor in my first call, sometimes presbyteries do pick on the new kids, and in Southwest Ohio, I was maybe 2 years in, maybe 3 years in my first call. And I was called by the state clerk, will you serve on an investigating committee? Because that's the process. A formal allegation of offense is received by the state clerk in writing, and you form an investigating committee to investigate whether that allegation of offense can be upheld. So I was asked to serve on the investigating committee, and then that investigating committee voted me to chair it. Whoa. Anyway, and we came to the conclusion that there was sufficient evidence to uphold the allegation of offense, and so we wrote charges for the Presbytery's PJC, and went to the PJC, and myself and another member of the investigating committee served then as the prosecuting committee to argue our case in front of the Presbytery's Permanent Judicial Commission. I mean, it is kind of like the televised trials you see on TV, except we were talking about the Bible and, the Constitution of the Presbyterian Church. So I was in that process, and you'll laugh, the church I was serving was the rehearsal space for the local community theater. And so while I was in this process with the investigating committee and prosecuting committee, I was also in the chorus of some community theater musical production. I don't remember what the show was. And so I had to miss a bunch of rehearsals because I was doing this work, for the church. And in that community, the largest denomination was Southern Baptist. I mean, like everybody was Southern Baptist, and then there were those Presbyterians who were going to hell. And they had a woman pastor, so they were going to hell. And some of the members of the Baptist churches who were also in the show, the theater production, started coming up to me and saying, can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on? What is this that you're doing? You're in a trial? What is this? And so I talked to them about the fact that we have these rules of discipline. And I'll never forget this one woman who said, my church would be so different if we had something like that. But we don't have a way to deal with pastors who behave badly. We have no way to do that. I wish we had something like that. And it really stuck with me that as painful as the process was, as nasty as it got, as much time as it took, and the difficult things we had to wrestle with, we were able to deal with a pastor who was behaving badly and take steps that resulted in temporary exclusion, and then he never did any of the things that he was required to do. So permanent exclusion from ministry. He was not allowed to go and do it again somewhere else. That's a big deal.
That's a big deal.
So as difficult as the process is, as convoluted as it can be, as hard as it is when we do have to engage it, it is a blessing that we have it. And I am grateful to the people who have given so much time to make it easier for us to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a quick look at the overtures related to the current rules of discipline, so that, where's my sidebar? So that you can at least have seen them, which are all the way up here. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy. Almost there. Oh no. I am grateful. I'm grateful for the people who put all these words together. Okay. All right. So, like I said, there are 4 other proposed amendments that relate to the current rules of discipline. This one came from our presbytery, Newcastle Presbytery, dealing with a renunciation of jurisdiction. You may remember that we voted to send this overture to the General Assembly, and our overture has now been forwarded to the church as an amendment. So sometimes somebody who's accused renounces jurisdiction, says, I'm no longer a member of the Peace USA, you can't write me up on charges and take me to trial. And that leaves everything hanging at that point. You know, the person who filed a complaint, the people who have backed up the complaint, the church, where the harm may have occurred. So this overture seeks to answer the question, what happens? What happens? How do we respond to the harm if somebody renounces jurisdiction? And I will say, so you remember me saying that this is only related to the current rules of discipline. So if the church discipline revision is passed, if it's voted yes on, this goes away. This particular amendment, it doesn't matter if a majority of presbyteries vote yes, it's gone. It doesn't apply anymore. But I was able to work with Flor Vélez Diaz, who's the head of judicial process for the Office of the General Assembly, the head of the Advisory Committee on the Constitution, and a commissioner to the General Assembly to bring mirroring language into as an amendment to the church discipline revision. So even though this particular amendment would go away if the church discipline revision is adopted, we were able to amend it in that General Assembly process so that if someone renounces jurisdiction, there is a way to deal with the harm.
Okay.
Yay!
Yeah.
Part of being, in the connectional church, reaching out and going, oh, shoot, didn't think about that. How do we make it right? And I had some great colleagues work with me on that. So the second one is how we communicate if charges are to be filed. It's, small language change. Yes, like that. It's a small language change. And it has to do with asking. I mean, it really is a very small language change. Yeah, it shall ask the accused if they wish to plead guilty instead of if that person wishes to plead guilty. Small. But language matters. Language is important. And then the third is, again, under the communicating determination, the petition for review. How shall the petition of review be filed, and how shall people be notified? Clarifying that notification needs to be in writing, that both the person who has been accused and the person who made the accusation both must be notified that no charges were filed, if that's the determination of an investigating committee. So it's closing a loop in the process. I am certain that loop is closed in the church discipline revision. And the fourth again is about language. To amend throughout the current rules of discipline. So instead of saying the accused, replacing that with the person accused. So not losing the person while still maintaining that an accusation has been filed. And in the new church discipline revision, this language is used. So if that fails, if the revision of the whole chapter fails, this would allow, if this passes, would allow that change of language in the current rules of discipline. So it's trying to cover bases and make sure our language is in line with what we say we want to do. All right. Whew. The rules of discipline, ladies and gentlemen, siblings, friends. Okay, questions? Yeah, Marlene.
A number of years ago in our presbytery, and I don't know how this works. I'm sure there's a way to do it. I keep reading 15 days, 45 days, etc. There is still a way to remove someone immediately if
Yes.
need arises, correct?
Yeah, and so we have our own policy, but also both the rules of discipline and the proposed revision church discipline allows for administrative leave. And that's one of those places where, so currently if it's a situation where administrative leave of a pastor or a person is necessary, that's reviewed by 2 members of the PJC, and they make the determination, shall this person be required to take administrative leave, which in a 7-person PJC leaves 5 people, which is not a quorum. And so then you pull in people from the roster of previous. Yeah. So yes, that is possible. And that and the process for how to do that is spelled out. Including the fact that that is not meant to communicate guilt. It is simply, for protection of everybody. I mean, that's a hard thing to communicate, but yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully it never comes up, but
We did, I mean, right after I started in this presbytery, we had an active investigating committee that there was an agreement to pursue an alternate form of resolution. And that's where I learned how very little was spelled out in the current rules of discipline about that process. And fortunately, I call Flor Velez Diaz a friend, and so she came and met with our investigating committee and outlined the process, walked me through it more than once, helped train our PJC so they knew what they were dealing with. But it was one of those places where there was a lot of ambiguity in the rules of discipline. It was very, I mean, there's like one chapter, one paragraph. It's like, I don't know how to apply this to the situation. What does this look like? And so that is clearer in the proposed revision. Yeah. So friends, thank you. Just as a reminder, Tuesday, February 7th, starting at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom, right? Essentially here. Not this particular Zoom link. we'll have advanced registration for the meeting, but we will be voting on all of these amendments to the Book of Order. And in conversation with our moderator, Matt Waters, what we're going to do is essentially take it in 4 sections, since there are 4 sections with proposed amendments. We're going to propose each section as an omnibus. So, shall the amendments to the Foundations of Presbyterian Polity be approved? Omnibus. Part of our process will be leading up to the meeting. We'll put that out with the docket, and I will be inviting, if you want to remove something from that omnibus motion, email me. So instead of having to do it on the floor of Presbytery, which looks like this in a Zoom meeting, email me in advance. I'll have the list and the person making the request. If you're in attendance, then that amendment will be removed from the omnibus. So if you make the request, but you're not a commissioner or you're not present, it's going to stay in the omnibus, because that's how we work. But that way, hopefully, we make sure that the overtures, the amendments that people want to have an opportunity to discuss, are already pulled out and people are ready and have a chance to look at those. So we'll do each section separately. After the foundations, there'll be a break and prayer and some worshipful pieces, and then omnibus. Shall the proposed amendments to the form of government be approved? And that's the big one. That's that one. Again, we'll approve what's in the omnibus. We'll debate what's been pulled out. Same thing for Directory for Worship and then for Rules of Discipline. So that's the process we're going to follow, which will hopefully be a good balance of moving quickly through pieces of business that we don't necessarily need to spend time debating or discussing, while also being sure to have time to debate and discuss the pieces we want to. So please let your commissioners know that these videos are available if they want to do some preview work. The edited and corrected pamphlet will be on the website with the call to meeting, and those things will start coming out. Oh, dang, next week. Yes, it's right around the corner.
Cindy,
Eddie.
excuse me. So will your office be then emailing the respective clerk of sessions in the respective churches?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Clerks of sessions, moderators, the initial call to meeting and information will go out to the entire email directory, and it'll go out to our entire midweek directory. So that's a spread far and wide, but then we'll also do some targeting work to make sure people understand how we're going to approach these things. You won't quite have started yet.
True.
Yeah. But you're more than welcome in my book to help the clerk remember to make sure they're commissioners.
Yeah. Now, the meeting is scheduled for 6:30, but I heard you said 7?
It's February 7th at 6:30. I might have said 7 as well.
Oh,
because, you know,
okay. Thank you.
yeah. Yeah. No other questions?
Will be finished that evening?
My hope is that it will be 2 hours or less. It just depends on how much people want to debate things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, you know, we want people, if there are amendments that people feel really strongly are not good ideas, we want to have the opportunity to say that and urge the presbytery to vote no. that's an important part of our process.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marlene. Enjoy the rest of your time. And
Thank you. That was very helpful.
thank you, Jean. I'm glad. And the recording will be posted probably first thing tomorrow. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel tonight, and then the link will be posted on our website tomorrow. But if you go to YouTube and search for Newcastle Presbytery, this will be under our training playlist. Woohoo. You have a playlist.
I have it all in paper, so I was a clerk for a long time, and I worked for a law department for a long time, so I have some feeling for this.
Yeah.
I admit that it wasn't easy to read all of it.
No, it can be challenging. I haven't decided what February's third Thursday training will be. I have some ideas. But if you have a topic that you'd like to explore or something you're wondering about, shoot me an email. I would love to include that. Otherwise, I've got some potential guest speakers in my mind that I'm going to start reaching out to. So going forward, we will not have to talk about amendments to the Book of Order anymore until after 2024. So have a fantastic evening, everybody, and hopefully I'll see some of you Saturday in our Equipping Leadership Day. And otherwise, February 7th, starting at 6:30 p.m.
Thank you.